the way that they took advantage of an Ohio State defense. Like, this is one of those things where, as we meet here at 11:45 p.m. Eastern time on the East Coast, recording live, like, we've talked about this, right? Like, we've gone through a lot of the layers. Tom, you live blogged this, you wrote about it, you offered takeaways. Like, as we look at both Oregon and Ohio State, let's start with the Ohio State side of this. Do you think that there's a recovery from this loss?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any other teams in the Big Ten as good as Oregon. I think Oregon's a very good football team, considering they were missing a number of key starters on defense, the two biggest headliners being Kayvon Thibodeau and Justin Flo. But as part or just a result of the recruiting that Mario Cristobal has done there in recent years, they have depth that they haven't had in recent seasons. So they were able to lose guys like that and still hold up reasonably well. I mean, I don't want to give the Oregon defense too much credit. Ohio State did have 612 yards of offense and it averaged 7.2 yards per play. The problem was for Ohio State's defense never made a play. And there was absolutely nothing about Ohio State's defense on Saturday that was interesting or surprising. Like, they came out in their base defense pretty much every snap. They were mostly in man, and Oregon found a few plays that worked. Joe Moorhead, the offensive coordinator, found a few plays that worked, and they kept going right back to it. And Ohio State refused to try to change anything up until the fourth quarter, and that's kind of when it finally started having some success. And I'm starting to I'm having serious doubts about Kerry Combs as the defensive coordinator at Ohio State.
Yeah.
The impression that I get is, and we've talked about this with offensive coordinators and head coaches as play callers, where when they have more talent than everybody that they're facing, they just, call whatever play they want. It works. And they look like geniuses. And then maybe they move to a Power 5 level and they're facing teams that they don't have that advantage on. And all of a sudden it's like they're not as strong of a play caller. I feel like Ohio State's defense's game plan is just, well, we're better than them at every single spot. We'll just line up and beat them.
Well, I don't want to jump in right now, but Tom, because you were live blogging this, I want you to check me on this.
Okay.
JTT didn't come in. He was not a starter, correct?
No.
I felt like the best talent on Ohio State's defense are freshmen and sophomores. They are young players who are not in the starting lineup. Like, the best players on Ohio State's defense, JTT had the pass deflection late in the game. That was one of the biggest plays of the game. I think that this decision-making process is not even a down-to-down basis type situation for Kerry Combs. I think it might be, who do you have on the field? And that is one thing that is really interesting with a lot of these teams that recruit at a very high level, where winning a game against another team that is one of the best teams in the country might not be a situation where you put out the person that you trust the most. It might be you need to put out your most talented players. And I kind of feel like Ohio State,
I think he's an incredibly talented player, and I don't think that if you argue he deserves more snaps, there's going to be many people that say, no, he shouldn't be on the field more often. But I don't think it was the personnel in particular. I think it was just they ran into an opponent where they just kind of threw their guys out there and went with their normal game plan if we're better than you are, and they weren't. They weren't better than Oregon at every single spot. Oregon's offensive line played very well. Ohio State only had one tackle for loss in the entire game. And last year, the problem with this team was it would get plenty of pressure on the quarterback. It just never got home. Today, it didn't do anything. They weren't in the backfield. They weren't disrupting anything back there. They weren't putting any pressure on Anthony Brown. They weren't putting any pressure on the Oregon running game. They were just getting blown off the ball. And I feel like this is a defense that, at some point, when you're not getting any pressure, you got to sit there and say, well, crap, man, whether we start doing stunts or we start bringing some zone blitzes or doing something we don't normally do, we've got to do something to bring pressure. And Ohio State never did. And
Tom,
go ahead.
I think you nailed it, right? They are so simple, but they're not there are some teams, we'll talk about one in a little bit, that's pretty simple, but they execute extremely well. And they know exactly what they're doing. Ohio State is not simple with the purpose of playing fast, or at least if that is the purpose, they don't seem to do so. I can see if you're trying to do a whole lot of complex stuff, okay, that's why you're playing slow, but they don't play fast relative to what we've seen these guys run in camps as recruits, and basically relative to how well and how athletic we know they are. I'm not seeing it with this defensive coaching staff right now at Ohio State, and I think it's going to hold them back. Kind of like, honestly, like how Lincoln Riley needed to get rid of Stoops-Spretter, and bring in somebody.
Yeah, I think looking around like the rest of the Big Ten, they're probably going to be fine, because I don't know that there's any real offenses that can really pose them a ton of problems just based on the matchups. But if they get through the Big Ten and then they get to the college football playoff, like I pick them to win the national title. I don't think that defense is winning a national title once it has to play another elite team. And I think that, I can already hear Oregon fans getting ticked off because we're focusing on Ohio State here.
No. I've got another Ohio State question. Don't worry. Keep going. Okay.
But I think that Oregon is not elite, but I think that's the best team in the Pac-12 by far. And I think that was just a huge statement for that program, because this isn't like, we could talk about Ohio State playing bad on defense and all that kind of stuff, but this isn't like Ohio State lost the game. Oregon won it. Anthony Brown played magnificent. CJ Verdell played magnificent. The defense it didn't shut it down, but they really kind of swallowed up Ohio State's run game, forced CJ Stroud to beat him, and he finished with great numbers, but there were also a couple fourth down situations where Ohio State went for it, and Oregon's defense came up with stops. And that was really the difference today, is that when Oregon's defense actually made plays, Ohio State's never really did until it was too late.